for me as well. American lady in the room, happy days. And I'm just going to move you over here so you're not in front of the words. So yeah, I'm Nicky. I'm MD of Padua Communications. We're a content marketing and PR agency based in Fordingbridge, up in the lovely Glasshouse Studios, 2 doors down from the lovely Fordingbridge Print, and opposite Fordingbridge Print actually has a bit of a diagonal, so they've got 2 spaces. We've been going 14 years, I think, this year, and we basically help businesses tell stories for long-term brand awareness and short-term sales campaigns. We're not industry specific. We work across all industries. We have obviously some favorites, but we're very, very good at taking sometimes some very dry, technical filled kind of content and making it accessible and interesting. And we also work with kind of consumer brands as well, but predominantly we're in the B2B space. Yeah, what else to tell us about? We drink a lot of tea, so you will see me. So cheers, happy days all the way as we do through this. So that's good. We've worked, with businesses, small and large. As I mentioned, we're very good at sort of taking technical stuff. Our sort of background is technology, PR, and most of our team are, if they're not still writing for the media, they have done. And I also used to be a journalist as well as my PR, over in the dark side. But my husband and business partner was also a tech journalist. So we basically, that's what sets us apart from a lot of sort of content marketing agencies, because we understand that sort of PR side as well. So rather than making content that is in the nicest, and I say this as a chartered marketer, marketing fluff, or pure sales material, what actually makes a really good media story. So this talk, and I haven't put my clock on, Rob, so you're going to have to make sure that I don't run over, because obviously with communications in your company name, and anybody who knows me knows I could talk for hours and hours and hours. So I wanted to do a little session on kind of PR and kind of pitching to the media, because I think it's one of those skills that there's people sort of, we've seen AbFab on telly, Emily in Paris is a bit like this, and now the whole kind of social media thing. And I actually think everybody thinks it's really easy, and it's not. It's probably, I would say, one of the hardest things that we do actually for clients, because until you start working in the world of media land, you don't really realize how diplomatic you have to be all of the time, because you're basically sort of in the middle between a journalist who's like on the whole quite diva-ish and a client who's on the whole quite diva-ish. So I didn't realize until I've been working in PR for a little while that I'd have been perfectly brilliant at the British Diplomatic Service or something like that, because it is a really, really sort of quite a hard job to keep everybody happy all of the time. So PR traditionally, I think people have thought it's, sort of just media, and then it's just kind of moved into kind of digital, but actually it's not. I would say actually predominantly an awful lot of the content that we create on the whole have come from that sort of media world. So I've just put a list here, but sort of press releases kind of, sort of more of a news release. It's how you announce stuff. But things like features, thought leadership articles, opinion pieces, they all have really come out of kind of media content rather than actually sort of marketing stuff. So that kind of like burst of content marketing that came about sort of 13, 14 years ago actually took a lot of those sort of media terms. And it's sometimes there's quite a kind of a lot of crossover, and people sort of thinking, oh, well, yes, no, you could use that for a media story, but then actually you don't have what you need in your toolkit. And that's what I'm hoping that we can cover off today, just to give you a bit of a steer in case you're thinking, actually, we could be in the local media, or we could be in some trade media, or we could be on BBC South, so that you've actually had a bit of a sort of think about it. So I just thought we'd basically start a little bit here, as we always do with the work that we do, about the customer and actually your target customers and your prospects, and actually why you might do PR or do some media work and what it's good for. So when we think about kind of marketing and we're thinking about the customer journey, and you're starting right up front at the kind of awareness piece where people haven't heard of you, they might not even realize they've got an issue yet or a challenge that they're having to face. But that's really a really good space when sort of PR as a kind of as a piece of work, or a sort of channel, if you like, to market and to kind of get your brand out there, works really, really well, because you as an expert in your field can create things like thought leadership pieces and tell your story and position you as your company here before a customer has even really heard of you. What you need to do when you're thinking about a PR campaign and about your PR strategy is starting with that customer, so what are their actual needs? How could you help? Where would they get their information? Is it, some local media? Is it that actually you have got a kind of, sort of a specific geography that you're working in? Have you got a specific kind of trade, kind of key trade media that you want to be in? So having a think about the kind of target publications or the media outlets that you want to be in and that you think your customers and prospects will read, or look at or view or listen to is really quite key, because otherwise you could get to the stage where you're sort of trying to do a scattergun approach and actually that doesn't really work for anybody. So that's my first thing. Have a think about where your customers, sort of where are they and what kind of things would they be sort of reading and would find interesting. If you're not sure, speak to some of your existing customers, find out if they read anything or if they get any kind of key publications in, where they get their news from, where they think about being suppliers. Now, quite often they do a Google search, but actually it might be a publication that has a digital site, is an online publication that would actually give them that information. So sometimes doing a bit of an audit first off to actually think, okay, this is actually what's going to work for my business and my stories is quite a key thing. And also be realistic about what you can achieve. So I think sometimes people think, oh yes, I'm going to be known for this. This is an amazing story. But actually, unless you're Apple, you won't get coverage all of the time. And it is a hard sell. There is so much noise. I mean, I first started working in PR and comms 26 years ago. And at that time, there was no internet and there was no social media. So actually, it was completely sort of if you wanted to kind of get some news in, there were select magazines and there was a kind of very, very linear process to actually get your news stories in. Now, obviously, there are more opportunities, but there are also companies and millions of PR agencies and millions of people trying to get their story out there. So you have to really sort of do that thinking up front. I also said about sort of being realistic. So this is what's called a flat plan. And it's basically how a publisher lays out a magazine. So I'm thinking here about sort of something that's printed, but quite often, even if you think, well, okay, I'm going to get into this publication, there will only be certain opportunities where you can get editorial. And that's what we're talking about from a media and from PR point of view, not advertising, not the booked space, but the pieces where actually there is a kind of, the news section at the front, or there's might be some longer features, which are kind of pieces that kind of run over 3 or 4 pages. So actually just looking at this, you can sort of see, there's actually a very, very set pattern to, okay, this is where an ad is, this is where a heading's going to go. So when you're dealing with a journalist, if you manage to get a piece in there, the other thing to do is to make sure that you have a conversation to say, how many words do you want? How many pictures do you want? So that you're furnishing them with what they need to fill that space or to help fill that space, rather than sending them, sort of 900 words for basically a 200 words of spot in there. So, and I do mention this one, but I would say if you're thinking, okay, these are the publications that we're going to go for, the best thing you can do is make sure that you go and actually get a copy of them and read through them, not only for the sort of tone of voice and the kind of stories that they're covering, but also so that you can sort of see actually where are the opportunities in here that we might be able to pitch in a story. So journalists, what they actually want is well-presented, clear, concise information that suits their audience. And that's quite a key thing as well. So in the olden days, when you just basically wrote a press release, a lot of PR agencies, say we've never been one of these, but would just write a press release and then just sort of pull together a press list and then just pitch out and hope, like, sort of something that would just stick, that it would just happen to get coverage. But actually, really, the best PR campaigns are ones that are much more strategic, much more thought out, and that kind of dovetail into what a publication is really trying to offer its readers. Now, there are certain areas within a publication that have a bit more control of what you might be able to pitch in. So quite often, let's see if I can reach over so I can show you. What's this? This is an FSB publication. handy on my desk, but quite often you'll have kind of a, if I show you this, it's got kind of a news section, and then you've got some features, which are the longer stories. News obviously is news. There's no point in kind of thinking, oh yes, well, I can go in and send a massive story in there, because they usually want to be able to go, okay, this is news, and it's little snippets, rather than actually features which have a much longer sort of period to be able to pitch them in. And also you have kind of a greater scope to be able to pitch in different ideas. So rather than it just being a kind of, we've got a new MD, for example, a feature would be able to sort of let you talk about kind of your sustainability message, for example, or how your business has changed, sort of direction. Or it might be looking at a feature like, for instance, I don't know, coronation successes. And it might speak to 3 or 4 different companies about things that they might have actually wanted to do within that sort of feature. And they will have known that well in advance, because actually those pieces are much, much longer. They take more research. They take more time to write up and edit and kind of get in there. So having a think about, okay, this is the publication that I want to be in, and also this is what this audience is going to be, sort of interested in, can really inform what kind of story you might want to pitch in there, or what you might have to actually create to be able to actually take hold of those opportunities. Journalists don't want to be sold to. So if you do actually speak to a journalist, or you manage to kind of pitch in the story, and we'll come on to that in a little bit, don't try and tell them everything about your marketplace and like a kind of, yes, we're great, this is our best, we're the best service at this. They need the information, but they probably know more about your market than you do, because they get to speak to all your competitors in much more detail than you do. And they obviously are specialists in that particular area, particularly if they've been writing about a publication or a particular topic or an area. They probably have been there for a while, and they've got that kind of legacy of information to sort of build on, whereas as we are, always dealing with the kind of, okay, here and now. So don't sell to them. Don't try and hide a story. If you're thinking, oh God, that's not going so great, but actually this is happening, just try and be transparent and helpful, and really think about what the journalist wants, and also what that reader or viewer might want as well. They also want information in good time to meet deadlines. So if you're doing an event, for example, and you're thinking, okay, it's next Tuesday, you should have been pitching it a few weeks back. There's no point in thinking, hurrah, we've got 3 days, we'll send it in and it'll get there. You'll be very lucky if you get some online coverage, but actually the more time and you can give a journalist and more information in good time to meet their deadlines, the better. The better you will be at getting success at getting in there, but also they might get to the stage where they say, oh, actually, that's really interesting. Instead of actually us just putting it in this, could you get us, sort of 400 words for this, and so you need to kind of make sure that you're working with realistic deadlines. And they also want, very important now, particularly in the world of Google, exclusive content. So that whole thing that I said about writing a press release and sending it out and hoping stuff, just sort of sticks. Nowadays, you're much better off at thinking, okay, which publications do I want to deal with? What can I craft specifically for them? What can I pitch in? And once you've actually got that kind of buy-in from them, providing exclusive content. That doesn't mean that you have to kind of, continually write stuff from scratch, but you do need to make sure that they are, if you're writing about a particular topic, that there are enough versions that actually you're not going to get penalized for kind of content appearing on different sites with the same wording. And also you'll really annoy a journalist if you do that. So yeah, you've got to think about stories that the journalist audiences will be interested in. Make sure what you're pitching is relevant, but also, very important as well, make sure that you're giving them information that will fit with their medium. So don't pitch something to a broadcast outlet if there is nothing to film. If there's nothing to come and actually film, and it's for the telly, you are not going to get them there. So you need to have a think about kind of location. If it's a visual thing that you're actually sort of sending, you need to think about the quality if it's an audio one, because actually when you're listening to something, well, I think we've probably all heard a crappy podcast quality by now, it really, really can make a difference. So make sure that the information that you've got packaged up for that media pitching fits with the one that you're actually kind of going for. So pitching and how to sell in a story. So as you can tell from what I've said already, there's quite a lot of research and prep. And there's a reason for that, because basically what you want to do is, if you get so that a journalist gets to know you and they trust you as a thought leader and an expert in your space, they want to know that they can come back and actually you're going to give them relevant information, that you're going to be able to give them everything. So, for example, if you pitch in a story about a new CFO, for instance, or somebody, you know, sort of who's quite key in your organization, but then the only photo you've got of them is them, you know, in a bikini at a party, not good. Okay, so you need to make sure that you've got, you know, if I'm pitching in this story, I've got the story, I've got the fact, but I've also got, this is the spokesperson, I've got a decent image of them that's actually going to fit with your brand as well. You need to make sure that you've got timing and the time right for pitching in. So try and find out when the press days are, if it's a print publication, so that you can work backwards from it to ensure that you've got enough time to actually sell that story in. And don't, well, I was going to say, don't try and sell something in on press day. That's how we've sort of always thought. But actually, sometimes there are some good things to do to know about that. So, for example, we used to work with Fujifilm, and they had a particular print publication, Print Week, which comes out every week. Used to. And actually, if they were making redundancies, for example, pitching and letting that story go maybe an hour before actually they hit print, the press deadline, meant that there's actually only an hour to write that story, which could be quite negative, and you wouldn't want them to have enough time to go and maybe speak to staff who are disgruntled, because all of a sudden that story could be front page news for all the wrong reasons. So sometimes working out when the press deadline is and when things will go live is really, really key for the story that you're trying to control how it's used. Also, make sure that you're not just sending a press release out, hoping it's hit, and then just phoning a journalist and going, did you get my press release? That just really, really annoys them. So you need to think about what else you might be able to offer them. So if you're sending out a news story, are you inviting them in to come and see you? Are you taking them for a lunch? Would you like to go and show them something? Would you like them to go in and see a customer with you? So you need to think about what other things you might be able to offer. What exclusives? Is it a trial? Is it a new idea? But try and make sure that you're giving them just that little bit extra. I mentioned that they're quite diva-ish. I mean, I'm married to one, so to say that's awesome. That was an absolute joy. But sometimes you need to think about, actually, yeah, they are, or they can be a little bit egotistical. So how else can you kind of build that story so that it's something for them and they feel like they're getting something special? When you've pitched in the story, you do need to just make sure that you're kind of chasing it up for a little bit. So phone them, actually see if you've got a telephone number, because they will be getting inundated with information and they may just not have actually seen your email with your amazing story. If you really think it is important for their readers and you think it would be really beneficial for them to see it, there is absolutely no harm in making sure that you follow up. And not necessarily just once and I couldn't get through, but email, phone, email again, phone, keep going up to a certain point. I would say, maybe, it depends if it's either days or maybe 3 or 4 times. If you haven't been picked up to maybe 3 or 4 sort of media chasing bits, have a think about whether your story is actually the right pitch, if it is the right angle. Because if it hasn't actually grabbed hold of their attention and they thought, yay, they're going to run it, I would say that you've possibly got the wrong person that you're trying to talk to, or it hasn't quite sort of dovetailed with what they're thinking their readers might actually get from it. And you might need to rework it and come at it from a different angle. So I mentioned there about the wrong person. When I first started working in PR, media teams were absolutely massive. The editorial teams were huge. Now, quite often, there are maybe 2 or 3 people at that. Quite often you might get the one person completely doing a whole publication themselves. So you need to make sure that depending on what story you're trying to pitch in, or what kind of area of, if it's a print publication, which area you're trying to actually go into, that you're speaking to the right person for it. You know, if it's a longer feature that you're thinking, oh, they might be interested in this, don't speak to the news editor about it, because they will be on press deadline, particularly if they've got a short print deadline, or short, you know, sort of they're like a daily news cycle or a weekly news cycle. All you're going to do is annoy them. So you need to make sure that you're speaking to the right person, so that you actually can pitch the story in and it fits within their space of the website or the publication. So a little bit about lead time. So I mentioned about kind of giving yourself enough time, and also working out which times you can work backwards from. So we call those lead times, you know, and actually they're very, very different from what a lot of people imagine. So you need to really plan well ahead to pitch in your comments and details and all the rest of it. For a monthly publication, you're looking at a minimum of 3 to 4 months. So if you think about a monthly publication that is on sale in April, it's probably the May issue on sale in April, and it will have been worked on before Christmas. So you're having to think that far ahead, particularly for features and in monthly publications, that you've got enough scope to actually be able to sort of pitch that in. If you're looking for Christmas stuff, and I mention this now because they will be working on Christmas issues next month. It's only a few weeks away before actually everybody does Christmas, because obviously Christmas is crazy for everybody, and they have to kind of get all those print slots kind of booked in well in advance, as Sarah probably will tell you about when they start doing all of their Christmas stuff as well. If it's a weekly publication, I would say you need at least a week for news, but you need 4 to 6 weeks for features that you're actually thinking about. If it's a daily publication, maybe 1 to 3 days for news, 2 to 3 weeks for features. If it's online, 2 days to a week, I would say, before it kind of could go live. Radio programs, 1 to 2 weeks. TV programs, sometimes months in advance. So it's a very, very different way than a lot of people think. I think they sort of think, oh, well, yes, you know, it says April, should we be working on it the month beforehand? No, not the case at all. So in your toolkit, when you're doing media pitching, there are some key media assets that I would encourage you to get. One of them is the pitch. So the pitch is an email that very succinctly tells your story and why you think it would fit with that publication. It doesn't go into massive amounts of detail. You'll have that as kind of, you know, sort of supplementary material. It's just to grab the journalist's attention, to sort of introduce who you are and why you think they would be brilliant, you know, sort of publication for this particular story, and that you've thought about their readership, and you've kind of, you know, you've managed to sort of help their ego of, this is exactly, I've done all that work. Sometimes if you can say, I see you've written a piece already about this, and so I know it's a particular interest, really love your style, then that's actually quite good as well. But so you basically have your pitch, you know, what you're actually trying to sell in as a story. You have bios and photography. So supporting photography of key people, if you're hoping to pitch in a thought leadership piece or a particular spokesperson, but also if it's a really great story of, I don't know, new premises, that you've actually got some pictures of those premises as well, so that they can see. You would have maybe a press release, which basically answers who, what, why, where, when, and how. So even if you're thinking, I'm not going to get it, it's kind of, you know, it's not going to get printed, it's a really, really fantastic piece of content to focus, making sure you've covered off all those questions. A synopsis of the story outlining the key points. So that's kind of the actual supplementary material that you might want to kind of say it's attached, or I've put more information, you know, sort of in this email as an attachment. So you're not completely giving them a deluge of information all in one go. Notes on key target journalists. So this is more for if you're working with other people in your organization and you're thinking, we're pitching in this story, but it's not for me that they will talk to, it will be this person, you know, head of R&D, or might be product development, or head of marketing. So basically making sure that you've got some notes on those key journalists that you are talking to, so that when they say, oh yes, brilliant, yes, you want to talk to me, that person then feels like they have a bit of background on what the journalist might ask them, or the angle that he might come at it with. So you're working on both sides, if you like, the journalist to be helpful, and also other people within your organization to make sure that everybody's as informed as possible. The other thing to think about is actually spokespeople in your organization, and actually who you think might be the right person to put forward. And I've put here that they might be different for specific stories. So that's because if you're talking about, sort of a particular technology area, for instance, it might be that actually the best person to talk to the journalist is the person who is responsible for those tech developments rather than the MD, because the MD might actually know nothing at all about that sort of technology element of stuff. Their business is running the business. So sometimes actually working out who the right person is and making sure that they are actually prepped to speak to a journalist is part of a PR person's job, or part of a thing to think about before you actually kind of pitch them in and throw them out to the wolves of the media. Again, because you want it to be an ongoing relationship. You don't want it to just be a, here you are, here's a journalist, and when they ask a difficult question, you haven't got the information to hand, but actually you've done all that hard work, got them an opportunity, and they're not going to come back to you ever again for comment on anything. So it's making sure that everybody is as prepped as possible. And with that, you might need some media training. So there's different ways of doing that. If it's a story that you think something like BBC South might cover in the future, if you're working kind of, sort of with a big customer that you think, oh, actually they are a massive local employer, or, there's a really, really key thing about it, it's worth doing really quite in-depth media training. So putting people in front of the camera and asking them really difficult questions and seeing whether they have a nervous twitch, or whether they use their hands too much like this, or all that kind of stuff is in some media training. Sometimes if it's just trade publications that you're dealing with, you could do a little bit of media coaching, and that might be just a couple of hours with something like me saying, okay, they could ask you this question, let's have a bit of a practice. And just being as prepared as you can be before you're kind of out there. And crisis communications is something that just sometimes worth making sure that you've got in your toolkit. Hopefully you'll never have to use it. But it's always good to think, okay, what are the worst stories that could affect our business? How would we handle them? What have we got? Have we got some prepped media statements? And have we got how we would handle if a journalist was going to come at it for a story, how we would try and control it and kind of do damage limitation? So it's something you wouldn't necessarily do all the time, but if you're starting to think, we're reaching out and we're going to try and get some media coverage, it's worth having a bit of a think of, okay, if things go pear-shaped, what have we got in place and how are we going to kind of control that? So, so if you're pitching, I mentioned about getting a copy of the publication. If it isn't working, make sure that you read it. Think about the audience and the tone of the publication, because it might just be that's sort of just slightly out and is not really grabbing the journalist's attention. But be honest about it as well. Is the story the right fit for the right publication? That sometimes can be, you might think, oh, well, yeah, I've done the press release and actually sure they're going to cover it. But actually, is it? So be really, really critical, self-critical about what you're trying to kind of put out there. If you're really not having any kind of success with getting kind of a journalist to say, oh, yeah, my God, that's amazing, try another member of the team. It might have to be from a completely different angle to get your foot in the door. But it's worth having a think. So just as I said, when you've pitched out, try. If you hasn't picked up about 3 or 4 times, have a think about the story and think about who it is you're trying to reach out to. Rethink the story. Sometimes clients and companies can be a bit too narrow with the angle. So you can be thinking about, well, we've got this product or we've got this solution and this is what we do. But actually that usually, in all honesty, makes a really crappy story. So try and think a bit broader. Think about kind of all the other kind of elements of your kind of content and your business and where you are in the world and who you've got within your team to try and actually make those news stories as exciting as they can be. And also have a think about what channels you're pitching on. So if you're pitching, I said about doing an email and then phoning, but actually it might be that if you're not having a lot of that, you find them on Twitter or you find them on LinkedIn and actually send them a message. So you have to kind of think of multiple channels of kind of where that journalist also gets those pitches to actually act on. So make sure that you're not too scared to use the phone. I'm looking this way because mine is here. It's not I think people think, oh my God, it's absolutely terrifying. But if you've got the right story, and the right publication, and you really think it is valid, and you're not on a press day, then actually you've got as much chance as anybody else to actually pitch that story in. So phone them, you know, be personable, be helpful, try and think on your feet of kind of, actually, I know you're interested in these angles and we've got something that meets that. So you're trying to be as approachable as you can be as well. Don't be too scared about a journalist. They are only people. They can sometimes be a bit spiky, but they are looking for help and they are looking for content to fit their publications. And if you're really, really stuck, consider survey data that can back up your story, government objectives, changes in legislation. Tie the story into these wherever possible to ensure that you're actually showing the relevance of why you're approaching that journalist and why you think it would be a kind of good news story or good piece of content for their publication. So I just thought I'd put some examples in here. So we work with one of our clients is a company that does uninterruptible power supplies called Kohler. They're based up in Hook. This is one of their key trade publications, and they basically make UPSs, like basically racks of batteries. But for the people that are working in that space, actually having as much information about the design of those, how long they last, how energy efficient they are, is a really, really key thing. So we had pitched into them as a kind of, we've got, sort of Alex, who is a kind of senior person at Kohler. We can do a thought leadership piece on, sort of basically how energy efficient an organization can be and how they can think about their power. And they said, yeah, fantastic. Can you get us 400 words? We need it by Tuesday. They always need an image. You need a standard, a pull quote. You need contact details. So all of that stuff that's within that sort of pitch that you're giving, those kind of key bits of information, actually pitched in. They say, yes, you have to then be able to action it quite quickly. So I mentioned on a couple of slides ago, the timing, but also that you've got the time, because if you've got a journalist says, yes, okay, fine, can you get that? Can you get it to me by Wednesday? You need to have made sure that you've got enough time to actually turn it around and make sure that it's great media content. This is another example. So we work with a company called Semco Style, which are a UK reseller over this big sort of business management philosophy, if you like. And the reason I put both of these on here is because it's the same information, but one of them is a news story and one of them is a feature. So sometimes you can make sure that you've got all that kind of base material ready, pitch in a news story, but also then reformat it, reuse it to be able to actually then pitch in the people within an organization so that you can actually do a kind of deeper bit or a kind of follow-up bit within kind of key publications. So don't throw anything away when you're crafting your media story. Keep it all together, make sure that you've got all the ingredients, because you never know when you all of a sudden might have to go, oh, I need to add in some extra facts. And actually here I've got another piece. It's great. So just have a think about, sort of all those ingredients, and also think about photography. So this is a day that they did last year. We made sure that there was some photography done on the day so that they've got some branded stuff that they could talk about that we could use for news stories, but also that we've got the actual key people who in this feature bit on the right hand side was talking, they were doing like an interview with them. And then they're not going to want a picture of just the brand. They're going to want to be a picture of the key kind of people within that organization. So make sure you've got all of the ingredients before you kind of reach out. And then lastly, and this is actually from Dorset Living, and it's from a couple of years ago, but I just thought it's, again, a really good example. This is Lucy, who she does painting, makes move selfies as paintings, and she takes like landmarks around the southeast and southwest, and basically then has a big cow face in it. And we basically did a like a double page spread in the publication that comes with kind of Southern Echo about her. And again, it's a setting up a media interview. So the journalist wanted to talk to her, but we'd kind of done some media briefing. We also had lots of product images and a picture of her at work. The bit about the amusing animals in the picture, we didn't write that. That's not the PR person's job. You're giving the facts. You don't need to be clever. You can let the editorial and the kind of production team on a publication work about that, but you just need to think about whether it actually would be a good story. So back to basics. If you're not sure what your key messages are, or whether you've got a story, or you're thinking, I think this, but I'm not too sure, speak to a communications professional that's worked in PR before you try. If not, if you think, actually, I think it's a good story, and you don't want to speak to a PR person like myself, then speak to one of your customers and ask them, do you think that'd be an interesting story? And before you speak to a journalist, and just test it out. Don't blow your chances. You're aiming to be the uber helpful person who makes a journalist's life easier forever and ever and ever. So make sure you've done the prep so that it's an ongoing relationship. And if you're really, really sort of stuck, or you're just sort of thinking about sort of different ideas, a PR person will have, for us, we subscribe to a media database, which has got kind of forward features. So we can have a look and see for key publications, whether there are kind of key stories that helps us kind of with that PR strategy. But you can sometimes just look at like #journal requests on Twitter, and there are journalists on there asking for stuff all of the time. So that's quite maybe a good place for you to start to think, what kind of angles could we go for? Basic media friendly tips for the content that you're sending out. Make sure you're using simple words with excellent grammar. Don't try and be too clever about it. Make sure that you spell check copy before you send it to a publication. And I would say with this one as well, make sure that you are aware of the publication that you're sending it to. So Print Week, the one I mentioned earlier, the guy that used to be the scary journalist there was a guy called Barney. And the thing that used to annoy him more than anything was people thinking that they were a daily or a monthly publication rather than a weekly publication, even though the publication was called Print Week and actually had it in the title. So just make sure that you are aware of that as well. If writing is a challenge, get a copywriter or ghostwriter to help. So even a press release, quite often a lot of content people, if they've worked in the media or they've been a journalist before, can write you a press release. It shouldn't take too long. It shouldn't be too expensive. Don't be creative with headlines yourself. Focus on the story and the audience. The media outlet will sort what will fit with its media style. Make it easy for journalists. So reference links, if you're going to use some stats or kind of, a government survey said this, make sure that you actually give it to them and say it's on this site or it's at this link, rather than just referencing it and then they have to do hard work to try and find out whether it's actually substantiated or not. Make sure that you don't send them PDFs. Use unbranded Word docs. Make it as easy as possible for them to copy and paste text and information. And remember that every element of your copy in your press release for that audience, but also in that email and that pitch, is to get the person to read the next sentence. So make sure that you are being as upfront and kind of as passionate about your story as you can be. Most people who are working in PR, they are quite upbeat and quite out there because they have to be, because you're pitching in and you're trying to actually get that news hook in. So don't try and be a bit standoffish. If you don't believe it's a news story, there's absolutely no way a publication will be like, oh yeah, because you need to have some passion there and some fire in your belly. And lastly, and this is why it's a difficult thing to measure, PR, which is very, very different from advertising, because obviously you know that you're going to book it and it's there, but then you've bought the space. If you've got a journalist writing a story, it's almost like that sort of brand and like thumbs up that yes, you are a bit more substantiated than just buying some ad space. But no matter how much hard work you've done, how much, yes, we're going to run that, there's the risk of it. If a news story breaks, there's always a chance that your story will be bumped for something that is happening. So, last week, in fact, actually, the last few years for PR people have been a bloody nightmare to pitch stuff out, because we had pandemic stories. And for the last few weeks, we've had bank holiday and coronation stories for pitching in. So actually, you need to make sure that you've got your expectations realistic and a bit managed for what is actually going to be going on in the kind of, sort of new zeitgeist, if you like. And there is always a chance that, something will happen and it will just get bumped. Usually means you can still use that content on your own site, and you could maybe able to repurpose it and then repitch it as a slightly different angle. But a lot of it is luck and making sure that you've got that timing right. And that's why it's important to make sure that you've got all those packages put together and you've done as much prep work as you can, because you've got much more chance of it being successful if you've done that thinking up front. If you need any help, come on and ask us. There are other resources on our website as well. I did put the link in the chat, but there's things in there on the blog about writing a press release and, sort of thinking about story angles and stuff like that. Or just give us a ring and, sort of we'll see if we can help. And that's it. I just wanted to say as well, we've got our future dates for Link and Learn, which is our free sessions, usually on the second Tuesday of every month, although there's one next week, no, 29th of May. And basically come along and see if you can learn about lots of different things in the content and PR world, because it's all good fun. That's it.
Wow.
Hopefully that was helpful. It's a bit of a whistle stop.
It certainly was that. There's an awful lot of content in there. Thanks very much, Nicky. Quick question from me.
Yeah.
You've spoken a lot about print publications with a weekly, monthly, whatever deadline.
Yeah.
Which then prompted the thought around online publications, online platforms, which are presumably constantly posting news stories all the time. Would you write a different style of content or take a different style of approach to them?
Sometimes slightly. So what you have within a print publication is I mentioned you have this sort of certain opportunities. So, you might be there's a focus on a member of staff, for example, as a feature that runs every month or runs every fortnight or whatever. And you might not have the similar sort of thing online. Although, to be fair, because of website design, as you know, Rob, actually, if they've got a template, then it has got a certain look and feel. What I would say about online publications is that actually think about how the reader would read the story. Because sometimes it would be better to have then, you might find that you've pitched in a story to the editorial team and they say to you, okay, well, fine, we'll have, an 800-word article, but actually what we want is a 100-word synopsis of it because we know we're going to do a summary box at the top. Oh, and we want 3 bullets that summarize the story. So there's certain elements of kind of that need to be considered. The other things as well is that an awful lot of online sites, if you have done the research, you can sometimes find that you can publish your own stuff on certain sites and they will be running their own editorial kind of platforms, but you also still have like a blogging facility within it. You still have to pitch it in. You can't just kind of, hope, put stuff up and it be shockingly rubbish or not match their audience needs. They just won't publish it. But you can still pitch in the same way and say, I'm thinking of going to put this on your online platform, but I just wanted to give you the heads up. This is why. So sometimes if it's online, it's almost a bit more work because you have to do the pitching and also the online and also be aware that you have to speak to a web publisher as well as kind of the editorial team. So the formatting of the information you're giving out has to be sometimes a bit more constrained just because of the way that they've designed their online site. But I would say if you've got the right audience and you've got the right story, even if it's an online publication, the best ones are they still have an editorial team. You still have to pitch in a story. You still have the same thing.
Okay.
It's just the timings that might be different for you.
Yeah. Any questions from anyone else?
A couple from me. Nicky, thank you. That was great. You mentioned about format of press releases.
Yeah.
We used to do PDFs and someone said don't do that because journalists are lazy and they just want to basically scrape the text.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts? You mentioned, I think, using a Word document as opposed to just typing it up into an email.
If I send a press release out to a journalist, I usually attach an unbranded Word doc, but I will put in an intro email and then I will copy the press release underneath it.
Okay, so they've got a choice.
They've got both choices, yeah. The main thing about it that I would say about it is make sure that it's spaced out. So the biggest thing for a journalist is and this is quite a good test, if you print something out and it's 1 or 1.1 spacing as to 1.5 spacing, and you scan it for 20 seconds and see how much information you get out of it, you'll realize why the press release has the format that it does. So press release always has 1.5 line spacing, and it's because a journalist they won't read it, they will scan it. So I think, again, in fact, I was reading something earlier about scanning and how people kind of read information online as opposed to in print, and that just making it as easy as possible for them to get the information. So again, you know, I think sometimes people think, oh yeah, press release has got to be pages and pages long. If you can get everything you need to get onto a press release in basically a side of A4 or a side and a half, fantastic. Make sure you've got contact details at the bottom of it so it's easy for them. But you know, if you've answered the who, what, why, where, when, how question in basically 2 paragraphs, fantastic.
Thank you. And in terms of the image, you literally attach that to the email, presumably not super high res, because then it's more chance to get.
That's a really, really brilliant question. So if it's an online publication, yeah, then you need it to be 72 dpi. If it's a print publication, it needs to be 300 dpi.
Okay.
Because otherwise it will be pixelated and it will look, well, in fact, all they'll do is phone you and say, have you got another image?
No, well,
can I add something to that as well? Please don't insert your image in a Word document, put it separately.
No.
Yeah, as an attachment.
As an attachment, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I actually always send them as attachments rather than, I know sometimes, you know, you have that kind of, oh, I can send you a Dropbox link, and you know, we do use things like Dropbox for sending links, but if I'm sending something to a journalist, I always attach it so that it makes it, they've got it in one place and they can just basically, they don't have to go anywhere else for the information.
Yeah. And final thing from me was the chasing up. You mentioned chasing up maybe 3 or 4 times. I guess it's a fine balance between becoming a really annoying person and saying, have you got this? Are you going to run it? And
yes, don't do that.
No, but conversely, if you just send them one and for all you know, it might get stuck in their spam filters and they haven't even got it. So I guess at least one chase up is worth doing.
One chase up, but that's where I've said about that. Think about what else you could get them, because it's much easier to phone a journalist and say, I'm phoning because I've sent you the press release and I wanted to see if you'd be interested in coming along, or we'd like to invite you to this kind of launch event or whatever, because you're giving them something else rather than did you get my press release and are you going to run it? There's no point if you know, of sort of doing that. So always think, what else could you offer them, or could you get them? Yeah. Sometimes a really good thing to do is to do a follow-up to say, we've had some new photography done, actually, and I sent you the release and this, but actually we've got some really great new shots. And that's another thing to kind of give them to make their life easier, but that might be your second pitch.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
It's all right, pleasure.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Something that's just occurred to me. Obviously, we work with customers in lots of different industries. Yeah. If we spoke to some of our customers and said, what are the publications that you use, and then approached publications and did almost like a case study about how we helped our customer, is that something we could do, or is that?
So I would say case studies are really great as kind of media stories, but it needs to be, so it's not just we help them do this from a promotional point of view. It needs to, you're much better off thinking about, okay, what is the bigger story? Is it the customer basically, I don't know, meeting compliance, for instance, or is it the government cutting their waste, or as part of their sustainability thing, they've chosen a particular stock now to do actually, or they've really looked at kind of why they are printing these bits of information and how they're printing them or something like that. That's a much better story than, and then you've got I always think of case studies as almost like box outs. So, like sometimes when you look at a publication and you've got like a double page spread, and then there might be like a different little square in the corner with like an image and like a little bit saying, this is an example of this person's done that. That's what the case study is for. Unless you are a member of something like, Chambers, and you want to be in the Chamber magazine, and you, as part of it, you can say, we're a member and we are due this space. Actually, a case study on its own, I don't think really does it. I think if you're saying there's these things going here, and I've got an example of a customer who's done this to support it, then that's a bigger story rather than actually just trying to pitch it on its own.
Okay, thank you.